I never thought the silence of our Brooklyn apartment could feel so suffocating until I found that second phone. It wasn't just a device. It was a jagged shard of truth piercing the fragile calm I'd held onto for decades. That night, when the knock came, I realized my life was unraveling in a way I never dared to imagine. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 72, I thought I knew everything about surviving in Queens. The rhythms of this neighborhood had become my heartbeat. The morning rush of commuters thundering past our third-floor window. The smell of Mrs. Rodriguez's empanadas wafting up from the first floor. The familiar creak of our wooden stairs that had witnessed 40 years of my marriage to David. My days blurred into an exhausting routine. I'd wake at 5:30, before the city fully stirred, brewing coffee in the same chipped blue mug I'd used since 1985. The coffee never quite warmed my arthritic hands anymore, but I gripped it anyway, watching steam rise like my unspoken prayers. The apartment was my universe, filled with the weight of memories and the burden of keeping everything together. Our living room told the story of 4 decades. Faded brown carpets that still held the faint scent of my mother's lavender soap, even though she'd been gone for 15 years. Wedding photos in tarnished gold frames lined the mantelpiece. David's smile frozen in time when love still lived behind his eyes. Porcelain figurines collected dust on every surface. Little shepherdesses and dancing couples, each one a gift from better times when he still remembered my birthday. I spent my mornings cleaning, dusting, organizing. Not because I enjoyed it, but because David expected it. The apartment had to be perfect when he returned from his mysterious errands that seemed to multiply with each passing year. I'd learned not to ask where he went or when he'd be back. Questions only brought silence, and silence felt heavier than any argument. That Tuesday evening started like any other disappointment. David was supposed to pick up our granddaughter Mia from school. Her parents were working late again, and I'd volunteered us for pickup duty. But 6 o'clock came and went. Then 7. Mia's mother called twice, worried sick. I stood by our front window, watching the empty parking spot where David's green Honda should have been. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. Children walked home with backpacks bouncing, their laughter echoing off brick buildings. While I waited for my husband of 40 years to remember he had responsibilities beyond himself. When his car finally pulled up at 8:15, I was ready with words. But David walked through the door, carrying his usual armor of irritation, dropping his keys on the kitchen counter with a clatter that said everything about his mood. "Where were you?" I asked gently, trying to keep accusation out of my voice. "Handling business," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Important things you wouldn't understand." The dismissal stung, but I swallowed it like I'd swallowed thousands of others. Instead, I reminded him about Mia, about promises made and broken. "I'll get her tomorrow," he said, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair instead of in the closet where it belonged. I watched him disappear into the bathroom, and something pulled me toward that jacket. Maybe it was 40 years of intuition. Maybe it was the way he'd avoided my eyes. Or maybe it was just the desperate need to understand why the man I'd married had become a stranger in our own home. I reached into his jacket pocket, expecting to find loose change or crumpled receipts. Instead, my fingers closed around something cold and rectangular. I pulled it out, and my breath caught. A phone. Black, sleek, newer than the ancient flip phone David claimed was all he needed. This was a smartphone, the kind he'd always said was too complicated for people like us. My hands trembled as I stared at it. The screen was locked, but I could see notifications bleeding through, messages, missed calls, a whole digital life I knew nothing about. Have you ever held something that you knew would change everything? That moment when your whole world balanced on the edge of a secret, waiting to tip into truth or remain safely buried in ignorance? I set the phone on the kitchen counter and stepped back, as if it might explode. The sound of running water from the bathroom gave me time to think, to breathe, to decide whether I was brave enough to learn what David had been hiding. The device sat there like a sleeping bomb. Part of me wanted to put it back in his pocket, to pretend I'd never found it, to keep living in the comfortable lie I'd built around our marriage. But another part, a part that had been growing stronger with each dismissal, each broken promise, each moment of feeling invisible in my own life, whispered that I deserved the truth. When David emerged from the bathroom, his eyes immediately went to the counter. For a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Fear, guilt, recognition. "What's this?" I asked quietly, gesturing to the phone. "Work phone," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Boss makes us carry them now." But David hadn't worked in 3 years. His retirement had been forced, not chosen, after his construction company downsized. We lived on his pension and my small Social Security checks, counting every dollar, clipping every coupon. "Since when do you have a boss?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. His face darkened. "Since you started questioning every damn thing I do." The conversation ended there, like so many others. David turned on the television, volume loud enough to drown out any further questions. I retreated to the kitchen, but my eyes kept drifting back to that phone on the counter. That night, I lay awake listening to David's breathing. For 40 years, I'd found comfort in that sound, the rhythm of shared sleep, of partnership, of two people growing old together. But now it felt foreign, like lying next to a stranger whose dreams I could no longer share. At 3 a.m, David got up for water. He took the phone with him. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. The jacket hung in the closet where it belonged. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd felt in those brief moments when truth flickered between us like a candle in the wind. Looking back now, I can see that Tuesday evening was when everything began to unravel. But the threads had been loosening for years, maybe decades. I just hadn't been ready to see how frayed the fabric of our marriage had become. You see, love can make you blind to so many things. And sometimes, that blindness feels safer than sight. Let me tell you how deep that blindness ran. How many years I spent telling myself that sacrifice was the same thing as love. When David's construction business failed in 2015, losing $70,000 of investor money, I didn't hesitate to cash in my mother's bonds to help him avoid bankruptcy. $28,000 that was supposed to be my security disappeared into his failed dream of becoming a contractor. "It's temporary, Margaret," he'd promised, holding my hands across our kitchen table. 6 months, and I'll pay it all back with interest." 8 years later, we'd never spoken of that money again. When his mother fell ill with cancer, I was the one who took unpaid leave from my job at the Queens Public Library to care for her. 6 months of driving to chemotherapy appointments, cleaning up after treatments, holding her hand through the worst of it. David visited twice a week, if that. "You're so good at this stuff," he'd say, as if compassion was a skill I'd learned rather than a choice I made daily. When Mrs. Santori died, she left David a small inheritance, $8,000 that could have replenished some of what we'd lost. Instead, he used it to buy a used truck for another business venture that lasted exactly 3 months. "You just don't understand investments," he'd explained when I questioned the decision. "This is how you build wealth in America." But we never built anything except a deeper hole of disappointment. Our son Ricky learned those same patterns of expectation. Every few months the phone would ring, and his voice would crack with manufactured desperation. "Mom, I'm sorry to ask again, but could you help with rent this month? Jenny's hours got cut, and with the baby coming, always a crisis. Always temporary, always my responsibility to solve." I'd sit at our kitchen table with the stack of bills, electricity, gas, phone, the mortgage we were still paying at 72 years old, and I'd figure out which one could wait so Ricky's children wouldn't go hungry. "Why don't you tell him no?" my sister Carol asked during one of our rare phone calls. She lived in Phoenix now, retired and comfortable, traveling with her husband of 45 years. "I can't," I'd whisper, afraid David might hear. "They're struggling." "We're all struggling, Margaret. But your son is 38 years old." The truth of that sat heavy in my chest. But love felt simpler than boundaries. Or maybe I just told myself it was love when it was really fear. Fear of being needed less, of being forgotten, of discovering that without my usefulness, I might not be wanted at all. The pattern extended beyond money. Every family gathering happened in our apartment because I was the one who cleaned, cooked, and cleaned again afterward. Every grandchild's birthday party, Every holiday dinner, every celebration of someone else's achievements. "Mom makes the best lasagna," Ricky would say, patting his full stomach while I scrubbed baked cheese from casserole dishes until my hands cracked. "You don't mind, do you?" David would add, never waiting for an answer. I minded. I minded when my arthritis flared from standing over the stove for hours. I minded when no one offered to help with dishes. I minded when conversations stopped including me, unless someone needed water refilled or more coffee brewed. But minding felt selfish, ungrateful, like evidence that I wasn't the loving wife and mother I'd spent 7 decades trying to become. Do you know what it feels like to disappear slowly, one unacknowledged service at a time? The breaking point came gradually, then all at once. Small moments that accumulated like dust in the corners of our marriage. Like when I spent 3 weeks in bed with pneumonia, and David complained about having to make his own breakfast. Or when I finally got hearing aids after years of strain, and he said they made me look older. Or when our anniversary passed without acknowledgement for the 3rd year running. "We don't need to make a big deal about everything," he'd say if I mentioned it. But I wasn't asking for big deals. I was asking to be seen. The worst part wasn't David's growing indifference. It was the way our children adopted his dismissive attitude toward me, as if caring for their father, their homes, their needs for 4 decades had earned me nothing but the right to keep caring. "Mom's dramatic," I heard Ricky tell his wife once, thinking I was in the bathroom. "She makes everything about herself." I stood frozen in the hallway, grocery bags cutting circulation from my fingers, realizing that the story of my own life had been rewritten by people who'd never bothered to ask what I needed or wanted or dreamed about in the quiet hours when I thought I was alone. That Tuesday night, staring at David's secret phone, I felt the weight of every unquestioned sacrifice, every swallowed need, every moment I'd chosen their comfort over my own dignity. But recognizing the pattern was only the beginning. Living differently would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed. Have you ever realized that the people you love most might be the ones who see you least? The phone haunted my dreams. For 3 days, I found excuses to be near David when he thought I wasn't looking, watching for that telltale glow of the hidden screen, listening for vibrations that might reveal another life. On Friday morning, David announced he was meeting Ray for coffee. Ray had been his best friend since high school. If anyone would know David's secrets, it would be him. "Take your time," I said sweetly, already planning. The moment David's car disappeared around the corner, I was in the closet, searching jacket pockets with the determination of a detective. The phone wasn't there. I checked his dresser drawers, his desk, the shelf above the bathroom sink where he kept his medication. Nothing. Then I remembered the garage. David spent an unusual amount of time there lately, claiming to organize tools he barely used anymore. The concrete floor felt cold through my slippers as I made my way to his workbench. Behind a coffee can full of screws and washers, wrapped in an old shop rag, I found it. My hands shook as I powered it on. No passcode. Perhaps David felt safe in his secret, or maybe he was just careless with his deception. The screen lit up, and my world cracked open. Message after message from someone named Lorraine. The timestamp showed conversations spanning months. "Can't wait to see you tonight, handsome. David, you make me feel young again. When are you going to tell her about us?" I sank onto David's work stool, scrolling through weeks of intimacy that belonged to someone else. Photos of a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing the smile I used to see in our mirror. A woman who clearly believed she was David's future, not his secret. "I dream about our little place in Florida," one message read. "Just the 2 of us, no complications." Florida. David had been talking about retirement communities in Florida, showing me brochures for over 50 communities with golf courses and pools. I'd assumed it was wishful thinking. We couldn't afford such places on our fixed income. But maybe David wasn't planning for us. The next message made my chest tight. The money from selling the house should be more than enough for our down payment. Our house. The home I'd cleaned and maintained and filled with love for 40 years. The equity we'd built together, dollar by dollar, payment by payment. I scrolled back further, finding messages that revealed a timeline. David and Lorraine had met 8 months ago at a doctor's appointment. She'd been his cardiologist's receptionist, recently divorced, looking for companionship. You make me laugh, she'd written after their first coffee date. It's been so long since a man made me laugh. The conversations grew more intimate, more detailed, more cruel in their casualness about my existence. How much longer do you think before you can leave? Lorraine had asked just 2 weeks earlier. Soon, David had replied. I'm waiting for the right moment. Margaret's been through a lot lately. As if my recent pneumonia, my mother's death, my job loss were inconveniences to his timeline rather than crises we should have faced together. But the message that shattered me completely came next. I feel guilty sometimes, knowing she has no idea what's coming. Don't, David had written back. She'll be fine. Margaret's stronger than she looks. And honestly, I think she'll be happier without me. I dropped the phone, hearing it clatter against the concrete floor. The sound echoed in the small garage, mixing with a sob I didn't realize had escaped my throat. Stronger than I looked. As if my strength was something that existed for other people's convenience, not my own protection. For 40 years, I'd poured my energy into being the wife David needed, the mother our children expected, the grandmother who never disappointed. I'd measured my worth by how well I served others, how little I complained, how gracefully I carried burdens that weren't originally mine. And now I was learning that my dedication, my sacrifice, my loyalty had been nothing more than a comfortable backdrop for David's real life, the one I wasn't invited to join. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and scrolled to the most recent messages. Can I see you tomorrow? Lorraine had written that morning. I have something important to tell you. David hadn't responded yet. For several minutes, I sat in the garage, surrounded by tools and oil stains, and the accumulated debris of a marriage I'd thought was solid. The afternoon light filtering through the window showed dust motes dancing in the air, and I wondered if that's what I'd become, just another particle, floating unnoticed until someone decided to sweep me away. But then something harder than sadness began to build in my chest. Something I'd been suppressing for so long I'd nearly forgotten it existed. Anger. Not the quick flash of irritation I felt when David left dishes in the sink, but a deep, steady burn that said I deserved better than this. I deserved honesty. I deserved respect. I deserved to know about decisions that would reshape my entire future. I looked at David's phone again, at Lorraine's unanswered question about tomorrow's meeting, and for the first time in my adult life, I decided to stop being a victim of other people's choices. Before I could lose my courage, I typed a response. Yes, tomorrow sounds perfect. Come to the house around 7. It's time Margaret knew the truth. I sent it as David, then powered off the phone and returned it to its hiding place. If my husband wanted to plan our life without including me, then maybe it was time he learned what it felt like to lose control of his own story. The next 24 hours passed in a strange bubble of calm. I went through my usual Saturday routine, grocery shopping, laundry, cleaning, but everything felt different, like I was performing the familiar choreography of my life while knowing it was the final dance. David seemed nervous, checking his watch repeatedly and making trips to the garage. By 6:30, he was pacing. I need to run out for a bit, he announced, reaching for his keys. No, I said quietly. I think you need to stay. Something in my tone made him look at me sharply, but before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw her, Lorraine, smaller than I'd expected, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and nervous hands clutching a leather purse. She wore a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and I could see why David found her attractive. She looked like someone who still believed in love. I opened the door, and her expectant smile faltered. I'm sorry, she said, glancing at the apartment number. I think I have the wrong... You're looking for David, I said. I'm Margaret, his wife. The color drained from her face. Behind me, I heard David's sharp intake of breath, but I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on this woman who'd been planning a future with my husband while I'd been living in ignorance of my own life. Please, I said, stepping aside. Come in. I think it's time we all talked. Have you ever stood at the center of your own earthquake, feeling everything you thought was solid crack apart beneath your feet? Lorraine stepped into our living room like she was walking into a courtroom. Her eyes swept across the photos on the mantelpiece, the accumulated evidence of 40 years she'd never seen. David stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, his face cycling through emotions. surprise, guilt, anger, calculation. "Sit down, please," I said to Lorraine, gesturing toward our sofa. She perched on the edge of the cushion, purse clutched in her lap like armor. "How long have you known?" David asked, his voice tight. "About Lorraine? Since yesterday. About the plan to sell our house and start fresh in Florida. About an hour ago." I looked between them, these two people who'd been building dreams on the foundation of my ignorance. "I found your phone, David. I read the messages." Lorraine's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God. David, you said—" I know what he said. My voice stayed surprisingly steady. He said I'd be fine, that I'm stronger than I look, that I'd be happier without him. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. "Margaret," David started, but I held up my hand. "No. You've had 8 months to say what you wanted to say to each other. Now it's my turn." I sat down in my favorite chair, the one I'd occupied for thousands of evenings while David watched television and I mended clothes or balanced checkbooks, or simply disappeared into my own thoughts. "Lorraine, how much do you know about me?" She looked confused, glancing between David and me. David mentioned that you two had grown apart, that you'd been married a long time but weren't happy anymore. "And what did he tell you about our finances? About this house we're supposedly selling?" Her face flushed. "He said you were both ready to downsize, that you'd talked about retirement communities." I nodded. "Did he mention that I have no access to our savings account? That he changed all the passwords last year and told me it was for security reasons? Or that this house is in both our names, which means he can't sell it without my signature?" David's face went white. "Margaret, you're making this sound—" "Like what, David? Like fraud? Like you were planning to steal half of everything I've worked for and disappear with someone who doesn't even know the whole truth?" Lorraine stood up abruptly. "I need to go. This isn't— I didn't know." "Please don't leave yet," I said gently. "I want you to hear something." I walked to the mantelpiece and picked up our wedding photo. David young and hopeful, me in my grandmother's dress. Both of us believing we were starting a love story that would last forever. 40 years ago, I promised to love this man in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, in good times and bad. I kept that promise through his business failures, his mother's illness, his periods of depression, his drinking problems in the 80s, and his heart attack 5 years ago. I set the photo down carefully. I used my mother's inheritance to save his business. I took care of his mother when she was dying. I worked double shifts to help pay for our son's college when David's hours got cut. I gave up my dream of going back to school because we needed the money I was earning. David was staring at the floor. I've cooked probably 15,000 dinners, washed roughly 20,000 loads of laundry, and cleaned this apartment more times than I can count. Not because I was forced to, but because I believed we were building something together. I turned to Lorraine. "Did he tell you I had no dreams of my own? That I was just waiting around for him to decide what happened next?" She shook her head, tears starting. "Because that's not true. I've wanted things. I wanted to travel. There's a cruise to Alaska I've been saving for in secret for 3 years. I wanted to take art classes. I wanted to spend time with my grandchildren without having to cook dinner for 8 people first. I wanted to grow old with someone who still saw me as a partner, not just a caretaker." My voice was getting stronger, fueled by decades of unspoken truths. But most of all, I wanted respect. I wanted to be included in decisions about my own life. I wanted to matter enough that if my husband was planning to leave me, he'd at least have the courage to say so to my face, instead of planning it behind my back like some kind of business transaction. David finally looked up. "Margaret, I was trying to make it easier." "Easier for who?" "Because it certainly wasn't easier for me to learn about my own marriage from text messages between my husband and his girlfriend." The word girlfriend hung in the air like a slap. Lorraine set her purse on the coffee table and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Margaret, I am so sorry. I had no idea. David told me your marriage had been over for years, that you were practically like roommates. He said you'd both agreed it wasn't working anymore." "We never had that conversation," I said quietly. "We never had any conversation about what wasn't working or what we might do to fix it. David just decided, apparently, and started making plans for both of us without consulting the person whose life he was rearranging." I looked at my husband, this man who'd shared my bed and my kitchen table and my hopes for so many years. Did you ever consider asking what I wanted? Did it occur to you that maybe I wasn't happy either, but that I might have ideas about how to change that? Did you think that after 40 years, I might deserve to be part of the conversation about whether our marriage was worth saving? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Or maybe you were just tired of pretending you still saw me as a person instead of a service provider. Lorraine was crying now, quiet tears that spoke to her own recognition of betrayal. She'd been lied to as much as I had, just in different ways. I should go, she whispered. In a minute, I said. First, I want to ask you something. In all those months of getting to know David, did you ever wonder about me? Did you ever want to meet the woman whose life you were planning to step into? She nodded miserably. I asked once. He said you wouldn't want to meet me, that you preferred to keep things separate. And that didn't seem strange to you? That a woman facing the end of her 40-year marriage wouldn't want to have any say in how that happened? I trusted him. I thought he was handling things the right way. I felt a pang of sympathy for this woman who'd believed in David's version of our story, just as I'd believed in so many of his versions over the years. Lorraine, can I give you some advice? From one woman who's learned this lesson too late? She nodded. Men who lie to their wives will lie to you too. Men who make major decisions without consulting the people those decisions affect will do the same thing to you when it suits them. And men who see 4 decades of partnership as something they can just walk away from without explanation are men who don't understand what love actually means. I stood up and walked to where she sat. You seem like a kind person. You deserve someone who will love you honestly, who will include you in the big decisions, who will respect both your past and your future. That's not what you would have gotten with David. She looked up at me, mascara smudged, but eyes clear. How can you be so generous after what we did to you? Because I'm 72 years old, and I finally understand that my dignity doesn't depend on other people's choices. It depends on mine. I turned back to David, who'd been silent through this entire exchange. Now it's your turn. What do you have to say for yourself? The question came from decades of accumulated hurt, but also from a place I'd never accessed before. A place where I expected to be answered, where I demanded to be heard, where I refused to let someone else's shame silence my right to the truth. David sat down heavily in the chair across from me, the chair that had been his throne for so many evenings while I served and cleared and cleaned around him. I don't know where to start, he said. Start with the truth, I replied. All of it. How long you've been planning this. How much money you've already moved. Whether Lorraine is the first or just the most recent. His face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the young man I'd married, scared, overwhelmed, out of his depth. Margaret, I never meant for it to happen like this. But it did happen like this. It's been happening like this for 8 months. So tell me why. He ran his hands through his thinning hair, a gesture I'd seen him make thousands of times when he was trying to avoid difficult conversations. I felt invisible, he said finally, like we were just going through the motions. Like you looked through me instead of at me. The irony hit me like a physical blow. You felt invisible? I know how that sounds, but no, David, I don't think you do know how that sounds. Because I've been invisible in this marriage for at least 15 years. Invisible when you stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing when I was sick, stopped caring whether I was happy or lonely or desperate for something to change. You never said anything. I said things constantly. I suggested counseling. I asked if we could take a trip together. I tried to start conversations about what we wanted our retirement to look like. You said we couldn't afford counseling, we were too old for trips, and retirement was just about stretching our money as far as possible. I sat back down, feeling the weight of all those dismissed hopes. What you mean is that I never demanded anything. I never gave ultimatums. I never threatened to leave or made dramatic scenes or forced you to pay attention by creating crises. I just kept hoping that if I was patient enough, loving enough, useful enough, you'd eventually remember that you married me because you wanted to, not because you had to. Lorraine had gone very still, listening to this catalog of familiar disappointments. And when did you decide the marriage was over? I continued. Because from my perspective, we never had that conversation. You just started treating it like a business arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. It wasn't one moment, David said quietly. It built up over time, What built up? The feeling that we were strangers living in the same house, that we wanted different things, that we'd grown into different people. And instead of talking to me about any of that, instead of asking what I wanted or how I felt or whether I'd grown too, you decided to solve the problem by replacing me. He flinched at that. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Explain to me how 8 months of planning a secret future with another woman while lying to your wife about everything from finances to phone calls isn't exactly like replacing me. The silence stretched until Lorraine spoke up. David, is what she's saying true? About the money and the house? He looked trapped. I moved some money into a separate account, for emergencies. How much? I asked. Not much. How much, David? About $12,000? I felt the air leave my lungs. $12,000 was nearly 6 months of our combined income. When? Over the past 4 months. So while I was clipping coupons and buying generic groceries and postponing my mammogram because we couldn't afford the copay, you were secretly saving money for your escape plan. It wasn't an escape plan. Then what would you call it? He couldn't answer that. Lorraine stood up again, this time with more resolve. I need to leave now. This isn't what I thought it was, and I won't be part of it anymore. She looked at me with something like admiration. Margaret, I'm sorry for my part in this. I hope you find what you're looking for. She walked to the door, then turned back. David, don't call me anymore. I want a man who loves me enough to be honest about it, not one who loves me so little he'll lie to everyone else to get what he wants. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, leaving David and me alone with 40 years of accumulated truth and deception. Well, I said after a moment, now what? But I already knew what came next. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to have to decide what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed. And I was going to start by finding out exactly how much of our life together David had been willing to sell before bothering to ask if I wanted to stay or go. Have you ever had to rebuild your understanding of your entire life while the person who helped create it sat across from you like a stranger? The next hour passed in a blur of practical revelations. David reluctantly showed me bank statements, revealed that he'd opened a credit card I didn't know about, and admitted he'd been researching divorce lawyers who advertised quick, easy solutions for older couples. I was trying to make it simple, he kept saying, as if simplicity justified deception. Simple for who? I asked each time, and each time he couldn't answer. By 10 o'clock, when David finally went to bed, I sat alone in our living room with a legal pad covered in numbers. Our joint checking account held $4,300. I'd thought it held nearly $16,000. Our savings account, which I'd believed contained our emergency fund of $8,000, actually held less than $2,000. David had been systematically moving our money, planning our future, researching our dissolution, all while I'd been cooking his meals and washing his clothes and believing we were growing old together. The betrayal felt endless, like those Russian dolls that keep revealing smaller versions inside. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom of it, another layer of deception appeared. But underneath the hurt, something else was growing, a kind of clarity I'd never experienced before. I called my sister Carol in Phoenix. Margaret, it's past midnight there. What's wrong? Everything, I said, and told her the whole story. When I finished, Carol was quiet for a long moment. Oh, honey, she said finally. What are you going to do? I have no idea. But I know what I'm not going to do anymore. What's that? I'm not going to pretend this is normal. I'm not going to make excuses for him. I'm not going to protect his reputation or his feelings or his convenience. And I'm not going to let him steal the rest of my life the way he stole the last 8 months. Carol's voice was warm when she spoke again. Good for you, Margaret. It's about time. The next morning, David tried to act like nothing had happened. He sat at the breakfast table reading yesterday's newspaper while I made coffee, as if we hadn't just detonated 4 decades of assumed partnership. We need to talk, I said, setting his mug in front of him. I think we said enough last night. No, we didn't. We need to talk about what happens now. He looked up from the sports section, irritation flickering across his face. What do you want me to say, Margaret? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. Can we move on now? The casual dismissiveness of it took my breath away. Move on to what? To you continuing to lie to me? To me pretending I don't know that you've been planning to leave? To us both acting like last night didn't happen? I'm not leaving, he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Only because Lorraine doesn't want you anymore. That got his attention. She'll come around. No, David, she won't. Because she has something I apparently lost somewhere along the way. She has standards. I sat down across from him, the same position we'd held for thousands of meals, but everything felt different now. I want you to understand something. What happened last night wasn't just about finding out about your affair or your secret financial planning. It was about realizing that the man I've been married to for 40 years doesn't see me as an equal partner in our own life. That's not— Let me finish. You made decisions about our money without consulting me. You made plans for our future without including me. You evaluated our marriage without asking me how I felt or what I might want to change. You treated me like a piece of furniture that you could just leave behind when you found a house you liked better. I took a breath, feeling the strange power of saying these things out loud. And the worst part is that I let you. I enabled it by being so afraid of conflict, so desperate to keep peace, that I never demanded to be heard or respected or included. David set down his newspaper. Margaret, I don't know what you want from me. I want the $12,000 you took to go back into our joint account. I want access to all of our financial information. I want us to see a marriage counselor if you're serious about staying, and I want us to see a divorce mediator if you're not. His face went red. You can't just make demands. Watch me. The words came out stronger than I felt, but saying them changed something in my chest. A kind of door opened, one I'd kept locked for most of my adult life. And David? I want you to sleep in the guest room until we figure out what comes next. I need space to think, and I need to stop pretending everything is normal when it isn't. This is my house too. Yes, it is. Which is why you can't sell it without my permission, move our money without my knowledge, or make plans for our future without my input. It's also why you can sleep in the guest room like a respectful roommate until you decide whether you want to be my husband or my ex-husband. I stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back. One more thing. I'm going to tell our children what happened. All of it. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I'm tired of protecting people who don't protect me. Margaret, they don't need to know. They have a right to know before they ask me for another loan that I know you can afford, but you're pretending we can't. They have a right to know before they assume I'll be available to babysit every weekend while you're off starting a new life. They have a right to know that their parents' marriage isn't what they thought it was. I left him sitting at the kitchen table with his cold coffee and his yesterday's news. For the first time in my adult life, I'd told someone exactly what I expected from them, and exactly what would happen if they didn't meet those expectations. It felt like learning a new language. That afternoon, while David sulked in the garage, I called our son Ricky. Mom, what's up? You never call during the day. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Something in my tone must have warned him, because his voice grew serious. Okay, I'm listening. I told him everything. About finding the phone, about Lorraine, about the secret money and the Florida plans and the divorce research. About 40 years of believing I was in a partnership when I was apparently just a supporting cast member in someone else's story. When I finished, Ricky was quiet for a long time. Mom, I had no idea. I know you didn't. I never told you things weren't good because I kept hoping they'd get better. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I know what I'm not going to do anymore. What's that? I'm not going to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. I'm not going to give money I don't have to people who take it for granted. I'm not going to cook dinner for 8 people and clean up by myself afterward. And I'm not going to disappear into the background of my own life anymore. Another pause. Does this mean you and Dad are getting divorced? I honestly don't know. Maybe. But if we stay married, it's going to be a completely different kind of marriage than what we've had. Mom? Yes? I'm proud of you. Those 4 words did something to my heart that I didn't expect. When was the last time someone had been proud of me for standing up for myself instead of for disappearing gracefully? Thank you, sweetheart. And Mom? I'm sorry if I've been part of the problem. With the money and the expectations and everything. You learned from watching us, Ricky. We taught you that this was normal, but normal doesn't mean healthy, and it doesn't mean it has to continue. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I ran a hot bath, poured a glass of wine, and locked the bathroom door. I soaked in peace and quiet. No one demanding dinner or asking where something was, or needing me to solve problems that weren't originally mine. The bathroom mirror was steamed when I finally got out, and when I wiped it clear, I looked at myself, really looked, for the first time in months. I saw a 72-year-old woman with silver hair and tired eyes, but also with something new in her expression, something that might have been hope, or determination, or maybe just the beginning of self-respect. I looked like someone who was done apologizing for taking up space in her own life. The next few weeks passed in a strange suspension of normal life. David and I existed in the same space like polite strangers, dividing household tasks and sharing updates about practical matters, but nothing deeper. He returned the $12,000 to our joint account without comment. He gave me all the passwords. He even suggested we see a counselor, though his tone made it clear he was going through motions more than seeking solutions. "What do you want from counseling?" I asked him one evening. "I want things to go back to how they were. Before you met Lorraine? Before everything got so complicated." I set down the book I'd been reading, a novel about women who discovered strength they didn't know they had, which seemed appropriate. "David, things were already complicated. I was just the only one pretending they weren't. We were fine before." "No, we weren't. You were comfortable, and I was invisible. Those aren't the same thing as fine." He looked at me with genuine confusion, as if my unhappiness was a new development rather than something I'd been carrying quietly for years. "I don't understand what changed," he said. "What changed is that I stopped accepting comfortable as a substitute for happy. What changed is that I stopped believing that wanting to be seen and heard and valued made me selfish or demanding. I always valued you. You valued what I did for you. That's not the same thing as valuing me." We went to counseling, 3 sessions with a patient woman named Dr. Rodriguez, who specialized in later life relationship challenges. In the first session, David explained that we'd had a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. In the second session, I told the full story. In the third session, Dr. Rodriguez asked David directly, "Do you want to be married to Margaret? Or do you want to be married to the idea of Margaret that you've created in your mind?" He couldn't answer. Because Margaret is a real person with needs and feelings and desires of her own. She's not a supporting character in your story. If you want to stay married, you need to be curious about who she actually is, not just grateful for what she provides. That night, David asked me a question he hadn't asked in years. "What do you want, Margaret? Not for dinner or for the weekend. What do you want from your life?" I thought about it seriously, maybe for the first time since I was young. "I want to matter," I said finally. "I want to be included in decisions that affect me. I want to do things that make me happy, not just things that make other people comfortable. I want to travel and take classes and spend time with people who see me as more than just someone who provides services." Is that all? No. I want to stop being afraid that if I ask for what I need, people will leave me. And I want to believe that if someone does leave because I have standards, then they weren't worth keeping anyway. He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know if I can be the husband you want," he said finally. "Then you need to decide if you want to learn how, or if you want to be honest about that and let us both move on with dignity." It was the most honest conversation we'd had in decades. But honesty, I was learning, doesn't always lead to happy endings. Sometimes it just leads to clarity. 2 days later, David sat me down with a cup of coffee and a manila folder full of papers. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what you want and what I can give you." My heart started beating faster. "And? I think you were right. I think we want different things now, and I think we've both been pretending that wasn't true." He pushed the folder across the table. "I talked to a lawyer about divorce, but not the kind I was researching before, the sneaky kind. This is fair, transparent, everything split equally." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Legal documents outlining the division of assets, retirement accounts, the house. It was detailed, equitable, and completely surreal. "You want a divorce?" "I think we both do, Margaret. We're just afraid to say it." Was he right? Had I been fighting to save something that was already gone? or fighting to save my own dignity within something that could be repaired. I need time to look at this, I said. Take all the time you need. But Margaret? Yes? I want you to know that I did love you. I still love you. I just don't think I love you the right way anymore. And I don't think I know how to learn. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. That night, I called Carol again. He wants a divorce, I told her. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Sad, relieved, terrified. Like I failed at the thing I spent my whole adult life trying to do well. Margaret, you didn't fail at marriage. You failed to accept being treated badly within a marriage. There's a huge difference. Is there? Yes. And now you have a chance to find out who you are when you're not spending all your energy trying to make someone else happy. I'm 72, Carol. What if it's too late to find out who I am? What if it's not? I spent 3 days reading the divorce papers, talking to my own lawyer, and asking myself hard questions about what I actually wanted versus what I thought I should want. Did I want to stay married because I loved David? Or because being divorced at 72 felt like admitting failure? Did I want to fight for our relationship because I believed it could be repaired? Or because I was afraid of starting over? Did I want to grow old with this man? Or did I just want to avoid growing old alone? The answers, when I was honest with myself, were clear. I signed the papers on a Thursday morning in April, sitting in a law office that smelled like leather and disappointment. David sat across from me, and we were both crying. Not for what we were losing, but for what we'd never really had. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said as we walked out of the building together for the last time as husband and wife. I hope you do too, I replied, and meant it. 6 months later, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Astoria, 5 blocks from the East River. It was smaller than the place David and I had shared, but every corner of it was mine. I'd painted the walls a soft yellow that made me think of sunshine, hung art that I'd chosen because I liked it rather than because it matched the furniture, and filled the space with plants that didn't have to survive anyone's neglect but my own. My mornings started with coffee in a mug that had never belonged to anyone else, watching the city wake up from my kitchen window. The view was different. Water instead of traffic, sunrise instead of shadows. But the peace of it was something I'd never known I was missing. I'd enrolled in art classes at the Queens Community Center, joining a group of women who met twice a week to paint watercolor studies of the city we all called home. My first painting was of the Queensboro Bridge at sunset, all golden light and possibility. You have a good eye, said my instructor, a woman in her 60s who'd retired from teaching high school to pursue art full-time. Have you painted before? No, I told her. I always wanted to, but I thought I was too busy. Well, she said, mixing colors on her palette. Now you know better. I'd also finally booked that cruise to Alaska I'd been saving for in secret. The deposit was paid, the cabin reserved for one, departure date set for June. When I told Ricky about it, he seemed shocked. By yourself, Mom? Are you sure that's safe? I'm sure it's time, I said. I've spent 72 years being afraid of doing things by myself. I want to find out what I've been missing. The biggest change, though, was in my relationship with our family. Without David's influence, without the pressure to keep everyone happy and comfortable, my children began to see me differently. Ricky started calling just to talk, not just when he needed something. He brought the grandchildren by for visits that felt like visits, instead of performances where I provided food and entertainment while everyone else relaxed. Mom, you seem different, my daughter-in-law Jenny said one afternoon, watching me play cards with the kids instead of rushing around cleaning up after them. I am different, I told her. I'm learning to be myself instead of being what everyone else needs. I like it, she said. You seem happier. Happier. When was the last time someone had noticed whether I was happy? Mia, now 13 and taller than me, had become my closest confidant. She'd started coming over on Saturday afternoons, not for supervised grandchildren time, but just to be with me. We'd walk along the waterfront, browse the bookstore, share ice cream, and talk about boys and school and dreams. Grandma, she said one sunny afternoon as we sat on a bench watching joggers and dog walkers, I'm proud of you for getting divorced. I looked at her in surprise. Most people think divorce is sad. It is sad when people who love each other can't figure out how to be together. But it's not sad when someone finally stops pretending to be happy when they're not. At 13, she understood something it had taken me 7 decades to learn. Besides, she added, unwrapping a piece of gum, Grandpa seems happier too, and that lady he's dating now seems nice. It was the first I'd heard about David dating anyone. After Lorraine, I'd wondered if he'd retreat back into himself or continue looking for whatever it was he thought he needed. Are you okay with that? Mia asked, studying my face. I'm fine with it, I realized, and meant it. I hope he finds what he's looking for. What are you looking for, Grandma? It was such a simple question, but it stopped me cold. I'm looking for me, I said finally. The person I was before I spent so many years trying to be what everyone else needed. Do you think you'll find her? I think I'm starting to. That evening, alone in my yellow-walled apartment, I looked through the box of photographs I'd brought with me from the old house. Pictures of David and me when we were young, when love felt like enough to build a life on. Pictures of our children growing up, family vacations, birthday parties, holidays. The images told the story of a life lived, but not necessarily a life chosen. So many moments captured where I was in the background, serving food, cleaning up, managing details while everyone else made memories. But scattered throughout were glimpses of who I might have been if I'd been braver sooner. A photo of me laughing on the beach during a rare weekend getaway. Another of me holding Ricky as a newborn, looking directly at the camera with absolute confidence. One of me at 40, dancing at my nephew's wedding, David nowhere to be seen. In those pictures, I looked like someone who took up space in her own life, someone who mattered, not just because of what she provided, but because of who she was. I was learning to be that person again. The phone rang, interrupting my memories. Carol's name appeared on the caller ID. How are you doing, honey? She asked. I'm doing really well, I said, and realized it was true. Actually, I have something to tell you. What's that? I met someone. There was a pause, then a delighted laugh. Margaret, tell me everything. His name is Frank, and he's in my art class. He's a widower, retired professor, and he asked if I'd like to get coffee after class next week. And what did you say? I said yes. How do you feel about it? Nervous, excited, like I'm 13 years old and going on my first date. That's wonderful. What's he like? He's kind. He listens when I talk instead of waiting for his turn to speak. He complimented my painting technique, not just my cookies. And Carol? He asked me what I thought about something, an actual question about my opinion on a topic that had nothing to do with what anyone needed from me. Oh, Margaret, I know it's just coffee. Maybe it won't be anything more than that. But it feels good to be seen as interesting instead of just useful. You are interesting. You always were. Some people just weren't paying attention. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. Outside my window, the city hummed with evening energy, people heading home from work, out to dinner, to meet friends, to live their lives with intention and hope. For so many years, I'd watched life happen around me while I managed the details that allowed other people to participate. Now I was learning to participate too. The doorbell rang, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw a delivery person with flowers. Margaret Walsh? He asked when I opened the door. Yes? Delivery for you. I took the bouquet, spring flowers in bright colors, with confusion. There was no card, no indication of who might have sent them. I was about to call the florist when my phone buzzed with a text from Mia. Surprise! I saved up my allowance and wanted you to have something beautiful for your new apartment. I love you, Grandma. I sat down on my sofa, holding flowers chosen specifically for me by someone who thought I deserved beauty just because I existed, and cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when you realize you're loved not for what you do, but for who you are. That night, I did something I'd dreamed about for years. I opened a bottle of wine, ordered takeout from an Italian restaurant, put on music I liked instead of background noise, and had dinner by myself without feeling lonely. I was learning the difference between being alone and being lonely, between independence and isolation, between self-care and selfishness. I was learning to be my own good company. The next morning, I called the Alaska Cruise Line and upgraded to a balcony cabin. Life was too short for inside rooms and compromise accommodations. If I was going to see glaciers and whales and the northern lights, I was going to see them from the best possible vantage point. After all, I had 72 years of deferred dreams to catch up on, and for the first time in my adult life, I had no one to ask permission from except myself. 3 months later, I stood on the deck of a cruise ship watching the sunset over Glacier Bay, Alaska. The water was so still it looked like glass, reflecting mountains and sky in perfect symmetry. Whales surfaced nearby, their presence graceful and unhurried, like they knew they belonged in this moment. I'd been traveling for a week with a group of solo travelers, mostly women, mostly over 60, all of us discovering what adventure looked like when you stopped waiting for someone else to approve of your dreams. "Incredible, isn't it?" said Helen, a woman from Boston who'd joined the cruise after her husband died 2 years earlier. "I always wanted to come here, but Charles thought it would be too cold, too expensive, too something." "I know that feeling," I said. "Do you regret waiting so long?" I thought about that as we watched the light change from gold to pink to deep purple. "I regret waiting," I said finally, "but I don't regret being here now. Maybe I needed to be this age, this version of myself, to really appreciate it." "You mean the version of yourself who doesn't need anyone else's permission?" "Exactly." That night, I called Mia from my balcony cabin, the phone connecting us across thousands of miles of dark water. "Grandma, how's Alaska?" "More beautiful than I imagined. I saw whales today, and glaciers that are thousands of years old. Tomorrow we're going to a town called Ketchikan. Are you having fun?" "I'm having the time of my life. I'm so proud of you for going by yourself." "I'm proud of me too." "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart? When you get back, will you teach me to be brave like you?" The question hit me right in the center of my chest. "Oh, Mia, you're already braver than I was at your age. You said what you thought about my divorce. You spent your allowance on flowers for someone you love. You asked for what you need instead of hoping someone will notice what you're missing. But I want to learn to not be afraid of doing things alone. Then we'll practice together. We'll go places and try things and make our own adventures. Promise?" "I promise." When we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching stars reflect in the water, thinking about courage and example and the ways we teach each other to take up space in our own lives. I'd spent 40 years being the woman I thought everyone needed me to be. Now I was learning to be the woman I needed me to be. And it turned out that version of me was braver, more interested in the world, more willing to try new things than I'd ever imagined. She was also, I was discovering, someone people actually enjoyed being around. On the last day of the cruise, as we sailed back toward Seattle, I found myself in conversation with a retired teacher named Dorothy, who'd been traveling solo for 5 years. "What's the best part?" I asked her. "About traveling alone, I mean." "You get to be completely yourself," she said. "No compromising on restaurants or schedules or activities. No managing someone else's mood or preferences. Just you and the world, figuring out what you actually like when no one else's opinion matters." "Does it get lonely?" "Sometimes. But lonely is different from alone. Lonely is what I felt for the last 10 years of my marriage, surrounded by people who didn't really see me. This kind of alone feels free." I knew exactly what she meant. Back in New York, my apartment felt like a sanctuary I was returning to rather than a consolation prize I was settling for. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My art supplies on the kitchen table, books stacked by my reading chair, plants thriving in the morning light. Frank had left a card while I was gone. Not presumptuous, just a simple note saying he hoped I'd had a wonderful trip and that he looked forward to hearing about it when I was ready to share. That evening, I called him. "Margaret, how was Alaska?" "Life-changing," I said, and meant it. "I'd love to hear about it if you'd like to tell me." "Can I ask you something first?" "Of course." "How do you feel about dating someone who's just learning to be independent? Someone who's never really been on her own before and might not always get the balance right?" There was a pause, and I held my breath. "I think," he said carefully, "that sounds like the most interesting kind of person to get to know. Someone who's still growing, still discovering who she is. Someone who's brave enough to start over. Even at 72? Especially at 72. We talked for an hour about glaciers and whales, and the moment I'd realized I was strong enough to stand alone in a place I'd never been, on a ship full of strangers, watching the world unfold in ways I'd never imagined. "You sound different," Frank said near the end of our conversation. "Different how?" "More comfortable in your own skin. More present." It was the nicest compliment anyone had ever given me. 6 months after that, Frank and I were having coffee every week after art class, and I was learning what it felt like to be courted by someone who was curious about my thoughts, my experiences, my dreams for the future. He'd never once asked me to cook for him, do his laundry, or manage his schedule. Instead, he asked about my paintings, my travels, my plans for Mia's 14th birthday. "I was thinking of taking her to that new art exhibit at MoMA," I told him one afternoon. "She's been getting interested in photography." "That sounds perfect. She's lucky to have you as her grandmother." "I think I'm the lucky one." "Why's that?" "Because she sees me as I am, not as what I can do for her. And she's teaching me to see myself that way too." Frank reached across the table and took my hand. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Would you like to have dinner with me next Friday? Not coffee after class, but an actual date. Dinner, maybe a movie, whatever you'd enjoy." My heart did something it hadn't done in decades. It fluttered with anticipation instead of anxiety. "I would love that." "Good, because I've been wanting to ask for weeks. But I wanted to make sure you were ready." "Ready for what?" "To be seen as the remarkable woman you are instead of just the helpful one." That Friday night, getting ready for my first real date in decades, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror applying lipstick and marveling at the woman looking back at me. She had silver hair and laugh lines and hands that showed 7 decades of work and worry, but she also had bright eyes and good posture, and the kind of smile that suggested she had interesting stories to tell. She looked like someone worth getting to know. Frank picked me up at 7, bringing flowers that weren't an apology or an obligation, just a gift, because he thought I might enjoy them. "You look beautiful," he said when I opened the door. "Thank you. So do you." He wore a navy blazer and a tie that brought out his eyes, and he offered his arm as we walked to his car, not because I needed support, but as a gesture of companionship. Over dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, we talked about books and travel and the ways our lives had surprised us. Frank told me about his late wife, his adult children, his retirement from teaching literature to high school students who thought Shakespeare was irrelevant until he proved them wrong. I told him about Alaska, about learning to paint, about the amazing discovery that I actually enjoyed my own company when I wasn't constantly worried about serving everyone else's needs. "What's next?" he asked over dessert. "What's on your adventure list?" "I'm thinking about Italy," I said. "I've always wanted to see Rome, Florence, the places I've only read about." "By yourself?" "Maybe. Or maybe with someone who'd enjoy it as much as I would." He smiled. "That sounds like an invitation." It might be." Walking back to his car, Frank stopped under a streetlight and turned to face me. "Margaret, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I haven't felt this interested in getting to know someone in years. Not since my wife died, honestly. You make me curious about the world again. You make me curious about myself." He kissed me then, gently, like we had all the time in the world to figure out what came next. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like we did. A year later, Frank and I were indeed planning a trip to Italy. Not because either of us needed to be rescued or because we were afraid of being alone, but because we'd discovered we enjoyed experiencing new things together. I was still living in my yellow apartment, and he was still living in his place in Forest Hills. We'd both learned the value of independence too late in life to give it up lightly. But we'd also learned that choosing to share your time with someone was different from having no choice about it. My relationship with David had settled into something neither of us could have imagined during those awful months of discovery and confrontation. He'd married Lorraine, not the Lorraine from the phone, but a different woman he'd met through a senior center activity. They seemed happy in a quiet way that suggested they'd both learned something about honesty and realistic expectations. When we saw each other at family events, we were cordial, sometimes even warm. The anger had faded into something more like gratitude. Gratitude that we'd both been brave enough to admit our marriage had run its course. Gratitude that we'd ended it before the resentment destroyed the good memories entirely. "I hope you're happy, Margaret," he'd said at Ricky's birthday party, watching me laugh with Frank and Mia over some shared joke. "I am," I'd told him. "I hope you are too. I'm learning to be." It was the most honest exchange we'd had in years. Ricky and I had developed a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect instead of unspoken obligation. He still called when he needed advice or support, but now he also called just to check in, to hear my voice, to share news about the kids, or ask about my travels. "Mom, you know what I realized?" he said during one of our conversations. "What's that?" "Growing up, I thought taking care of everyone was just what women did. I thought that was love. But watching you these past couple of years, I understand now that love is about choice, not obligation." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you take care of people now because you want to, not because you have to, and that makes it mean something completely different." He was right. I still made dinner occasionally when Mia came over, but because I enjoyed cooking for someone I loved, not because it was expected. I still sent birthday cards and remembered special occasions, but because those gestures felt meaningful to me, not because I'd be judged if I forgot. The difference between choosing to give and being required to give had transformed every relationship in my life. Mia, now 15 and taller than me by several inches, had become my closest friend. She was the one who'd insisted on hearing all my dating stories about Frank, who'd given me advice about what to wear on our more adventurous dates. "Grandma," she said one afternoon as we walked through Central Park, "I want to be like you when I grow up." "Like me, how?" "I want to be someone who's not afraid to start over when something isn't working. I want to be brave enough to choose what I want instead of just accepting what I get." I stopped walking and turned to look at her. "Mia, you're already that person. You've been that person since you were little. It just took me until I was 72 to catch up with you." "Really? Really? Don't spend 40 years waiting for permission to live your life the way you want to live it." "I won't," she said, with the confidence of someone who believed she had choices and intended to make them thoughtfully. That evening, as I sat in my apartment with Frank, both of us reading companionably in the soft light of my living room lamps, I thought about the long, circuitous path that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I'd been a woman who'd never eaten dinner alone by choice, never traveled without asking someone else's preference, never spent money on myself without justification. I'd been someone whose identity was so tied up with serving others that I'd forgotten I was supposed to have preferences and dreams of my own. Now, I was someone who chose her own adventures, maintained her own financial independence, and had learned the profound difference between being needed and being loved. "What are you thinking about?" Frank asked, looking up from his book. How strange it is that the thing I was most afraid of, being alone, turned out to be the thing that saved me. How so? I thought if I wasn't useful to people, they'd leave me. It turned out that the people who loved me for what I did weren't really the people I needed in my life anyway. And the people who love you for who you are? They're still here. And there are more of them than I expected. Frank set down his book and moved to sit beside me on the sofa. "Margaret, can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" "What do you see?" "I see someone who rebuilt her entire life from scratch at an age when most people think change is impossible. I see someone who had the courage to admit that comfortable wasn't the same as happy, and who did something about it even though it was terrifying." He took my hand. "I see someone who learned to love herself enough to demand better, and who created room in her life for all the people and experiences she'd been missing." "I see that too now," I said. "It just took me a while to recognize her." That night, after Frank went home to his own apartment and his own life that he'd chosen to share with me but didn't need me to complete, I sat by my window looking out at the lights of Queens. Somewhere out there, David was probably watching television with his new wife, both of them comfortable in a relationship built on realistic expectations rather than romantic ideals. Somewhere out there, Ricky was tucking his children into bed, maybe thinking about the conversations we'd had about love and obligation and the importance of showing his daughter that she could grow up to be someone who chose what she wanted instead of accepting what she got. Somewhere out there, other women my age were lying awake, wondering if it was too late to change their lives, too late to demand better, too late to discover who they might be if they stopped apologizing for taking up space. I wanted to find every one of them and tell them what I'd learned. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to remember that you're the main character in your own story. It's never too late to stop accepting crumbs and start expecting the full meal. But mostly, I wanted to tell them that the thing you're most afraid of losing, the approval, the companionship, the sense of being needed, might be the very thing that's preventing you from finding what you actually deserve. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were disappearing into the background of your own life? Have you ever realized that the people you love most might be the ones who see you least? And if this story sounds familiar to you, if you've ever found yourself giving and giving until there was nothing left of yourself to give, I want you to remember that it's never too late to ask for better. It's never too late to choose yourself. Share your story in the comments. Let us know you're out there, and let us hold each other up. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that you deserve to be seen and heard and valued for who you are instead of just what you provide, please like this video and subscribe. Your support helps me keep opening my heart, and it helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Because somewhere out there, someone is holding their own version of that secret phone, their own stack of bills while everyone else spends freely, their own silent disappointment in a relationship that stopped including them years ago. And they need to know what I learned. You are worth fighting for. You are worth starting over for. You are worth the life you actually want, not just the life you've been accepting. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for witnessing my transformation. And thank you for reminding me that sometimes the best way to heal is to help someone else feel less alone.